Let's dive into a truly epic story today for this explainer. We're looking at the monumental 70-year history of one of the 20th century's absolute powerhouses, the Soviet Union. We're going to uncover exactly how this massive empire violently rose up to challenge the entire world, and then how it dramatically, almost unbelievably, collapsed. To really get this, we have to grasp the sheer scale we're talking about. Look at this number, 15. At its absolute peak, the Soviet Union wasn't just one country. It was a sprawling union of 15 distinct republics. It stretched across a mind-boggling 22 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective, it swallowed up nearly 1/6 of the Earth's entire landmass. It's a scale that is honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around today. So, how do we tackle a history this huge? We're going to unpack it in 5 main acts: the birth of the Soviet Union, the Cold War of superpowers, the space and arms race, Gorbachev's historic reforms, and finally, the final collapse of the empire. All right, let's jump right into Act 1, the birth of the Soviet Union. It all started from the ashes of the old Russian monarchy. In 1917, the Russian Revolution completely upends things and overthrows Tsar Nicholas II. Fast forward through a really fierce civil war, and the victorious Reds sign a historic treaty in December 1922. This officially united Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Transcaucasia. But, they didn't stop there. Over the next couple of decades, from 1924 to 1936, they absorbed the Central Asian republics, and by 1940, they added the Baltic states and Moldova. That brings us to that massive total of 15 republics. Moving right along to Act 2, the Cold War of superpowers. Emerging from the utter devastation of World War II, the Soviet Union steps up as a dominant global force. And essentially, the world splits in two. On one side, you've got the United States championing liberal democracy, locking in their interests by forming NATO in 1949. Directly opposing them, representing communism, the USSR forms the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This pulls Eastern Bloc nations like Poland, Hungary, and East Germany into a strict military alliance. So now the whole globe is practically sliced down the middle by two fundamentally opposing systems, and both are absolutely terrified of the other gaining an inch of ground. And that paranoia leads us right into the next phase. Act 2 continued, the space and arms race. Now, while the US and the USSR never directly shot at each other, they were definitely fighting. This tension played out in devastating proxy wars, specifically in Korea and Vietnam. At the exact same time, they're locked in this terrifying, high-stakes race to stockpile nuclear weapons. But honestly, the most awe-inspiring battleground was looking up at the stars. The Soviet Union scored a massive, shocking early victory in October 1957 when they launched Sputnik 1, the very first artificial satellite. Of course, the US pushed back incredibly hard, eventually reaching the moon in 1969. But the point is, every single scientific leap during this time was treated as a weapon in this global ideological war. But things were about to shift. Act 3, main reasons for decline. From the outside looking in, the Soviet Union seemed completely invincible, right? But under the surface, this severe internal rot was really taking hold. Their economy was completely stagnating. For the average citizen, daily life literally meant standing in endless lines just to get basic everyday goods. Industrial production plummeted, and living standards crashed right along with it. A huge reason for this was the crushing weight of their defense budget. Just trying to match the US in the arms race was effectively bankrupting the entire country. And to make matters even worse, they launched a disastrous military intervention in Afghanistan in 1979, which heavily drained whatever resources they had left. This brings us to a crucial turning point, Act 4, Gorbachev's historic reforms. By 1985, the whole system is visibly failing. Enter Mikhail Gorbachev. He's a new kind of leader, and he shows up with these desperate, historic plans to save the empire. He rolls out 2 major policies. The first is glasnost, which basically translates to openness. For decades, the Soviet system had been incredibly secretive and closed off. So glasnost was a radical shock to the system. It actually granted citizens freedom of speech, released political prisoners, and incredibly allowed multi-party participation and let the press freely criticize the government. Gorbachev's second big lifeline was perestroika, or economic restructuring. Think of this as an emergency CPR for the dying economy. It permitted private business ownership for the first time and finally opened the doors to foreign investment. He also started pulling back on those costly foreign conflicts, famously withdrawing Soviet troops from Afghanistan between 1988 and 1989. But unfortunately for Gorbachev, we arrive at Act 5, the final collapse of the empire. See, Gorbachev fully intended to save the Soviet Union, but his reforms just came too late. By granting all these newfound freedoms, he inadvertently opened the floodgates for a massive domino effect of independence movements. In 1988, Estonia boldly declares sovereignty. Then, between 1989 and 1990, Latvia, Lithuania, Azerbaijan, and others follow suit. The whole thing reaches this monumental climax in December 1991. On Christmas Day, the iconic Soviet flag is lowered for the very last time. The very next day, December 26th, 1991, the Soviet Union is officially dissolved. Just like that, in the blink of an eye, this great empire was gone, replaced by 15 independent nations. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this profound geopolitical irony. Why are Warsaw Pact countries now in NATO? Remember, the Warsaw Pact was explicitly created to counter and destroy NATO. Yet today, former Soviet states, and even original Warsaw Pact members like Poland and Hungary, have actually joined the very alliance they were forced to oppose during the Cold War. It's wild to think about. It really leaves us with a fascinating question. How are the echoes of this fallen 70-year empire still actively reshaping our global map today? Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world.